Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for market intel, forecasts, and success strategies. Hello, I'm Michael Bull. This segment is brought to you by BOMI.org. They are the institutional high-quality place for training for facilities and property management. Do check them out. It's BOMI.org, B-O-M-I. And today we have I guess you call this show a little bit about education. The name of the show is Ph.D.s on CRE. And we have the opportunity on this show, as you know, if you've watched and listened regularly, to speak to some intelligent people who study commercial real estate, who really provide some great insight. Well, we've picked some of them that particularly have PhDs to give us an opinion of what they see in commercial real estate and in the economy, what's interested them moving forward, because I think it's a very interesting time. So let's get into it. Please welcome my first guest. It's Hugh Kelly, and he is a PhD. He's director of the graduate program at Fordham University. He received his PhD, or I like to say he earned it, his PhD at the University of Ulster in Ireland, and he's joining us on Skype today. Hugh, good to see you again.
It's good to see you too, Michael. I wish I could do it in studio, but technology is our friend.
There you go. And so let me just ask you that, kind of the broad, open statement as someone who's a student, if you will, of commercial real estate yourself, and you look at it all the time. You know, what is interesting to you right now? If the three most intelligent people you know came up to you who didn't really know, who didn't study commercial real estate a lot, ask you, you know, Hugh, what do you find interesting about commercial real estate right now?
You know, to such a person, I'd say, sit down, we have a long conversation ahead. There's hardly anything that is not interesting about real estate these days. And that is from the point of view of the industry itself, it's from the point of view of the economy, and it's important from the point of view of technology, which we're using today, which is more and more a part of our business.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Now, let's touch on a few of those things. First of all, you mentioned the cycle, and it seems like we've had a great long cycle, but you look at the more recent news and the stock market's doing well, economy's doing well, interest rates are rising, but so where are we in the cycle? How long do we have? Can we expect these great times for much longer?
So I'll go out on a limb, Michael, and say that I believe that we are in the late stages of a cycle. I think that the strength of the economy is pretty broad-based, but momentum is starting to slacken, even though we had a really strong second quarter in 2018. But I think that the growth in the second quarter borrowed some growth from the future, and so I'm thinking that we're going to be looking at investors and developers in particular, strategizing around what do you do when growth slows down.
And when you say growth slowed down, you're talking about like GDP or growth?
GDP, employment, consumer spending, trade, all of the above.
Okay. And how about just the overall commercial real estate world, where, you know, it seems like a lot of the sectors are performing really well?
We're hitting a potential economic slowdown at a good place in the real estate industry. Unlike several of the cycles in the recent past, real estate's not going to be the trigger of a downturn. It's going to be coming from outside the real estate industry. But we're still going to have to cope with it. But it's not going to be the fault of the real estate industry, as it was when the Resolution Trust Corporation had to come into play to deal with the overbuilding that came from the S&L crisis, and certainly not the consequences of improvident lending as we saw a decade ago.
So the coming to the near the end of a cycle doesn't concern you as much this time because of those of real estate. You don't think real estate's going to be that hurt, is what I'm hearing from you. But what about interest rate increases? You know, the Fed's talking about potentially 2 more increases even before the end of the year. How might that affect real estate moving forward and commercial real estate?
Well, the first thing to note is that those interest rate increases are past due. You know, the Fed, for very good reasons, held interest rates down near the zero bound so that the economy could get back on its feet. The fact that we have had a very long period of growth in GDP and a long period of growth in employment dating back to 2010, so 8 years or more at this point, means that the Fed did its job. But now it's got to prepare for the next event coming down the road, which means that it has to have some room above the zero bound to work with interest rates when and if those other indicators slow down.
So the economy's doing so well, the rates increases kind of acknowledge that, right?
I think that's right. And you remember a former Fed chairman by the name of William McChesney Martin, who said that the job of the Fed was to take away the punch bowl when the party got going. And that's what they're doing now.
Right. Well, Hugh, what do you think about the reduced tax rates for corporations, for individuals, the deregulation that we've had? What is the impact there on the economy and commercial real estate?
So there were a lot of concerns about the Tax Act about this time last year. Nobody knew what the provisions were going to be. There were some concerns about, on the residential side, what was going to happen to the mortgage interest deduction for homeowners. On the commercial side, what was going to happen to the 1031 exchange rules. And real estate came through the rewriting of the tax bill with most of its privileges as the most favored industry in the country in the tax code intact. And so real estate's done well on that side. To the degree that corporate profits are critical to economic health, the provisions about repatriating profits and the lower tax rate on corporations have helped extend the bull market on Wall Street to what is now the longest bull market in history. So all of that is to the good. The shadow side of that is that the tax benefits on the household end were very much front-loaded and are going to fade away. I won't say totally fade away, but are going to have lesser impact over time. And since consumption is still nearly 70% of gross domestic product, that means that we're going to find the consumer taking the foot off the accelerator for the economy. So I'm expecting that the second and third quarter of 2018 will mark a peak for the economy, and within 18 to 24 months, we're going to see whether that slowdown turns into an actual contraction, and I think that it will.
I see. So the bull market and the stock market have sort of reflected in a bull market in commercial real estate, right?
Yeah, although they're not always in sync with one another.
Right, right.
This time, what's been good on Main Street has been good on Wall Street as well.
Yeah. Well, what about the impact of the trade concerns? And when you look at the economy and commercial real estate there?
It varies across the country. But clearly, most economists, myself included, believe that global trade is important for the health of the U.S. economy and also for the health of our trading partners. And so I worry when we have a regime of tariffs coming into play to try to nudge trade in some protectionist way. I don't think that is a policy that will stand the test of time.
So you think that the there won't be tariffs then at the end of the day, or less than maybe are being tossed around?
It's not an economic question. It's a political question. And right now, the levers of politics are in the hands of the White House, and within the White House, in the hands of several people who are protectionist in nature. Those who are trying to deal with jobs in the coal industry, for example. Those that are looking to restrict our involvement, and where globalization and global engagement is considered to be a bad word. And so I am concerned about that. And I think, again, most economists fall into this point of view, and for good reason.
Right. And I like how well chosen your words are. Very, very well done there. And I think there's a lot of opinion either way on that side of it. We're not a political show. Let's go to retail. There's been a lot of talk about the demise of retail, about the growth of online sales, and the sticks and bricks having a tough time. What do you say?
I think that retail has been bashed somewhat excessively, and what I'm seeing in the investment community is people looking for the opportunity to find retail investments where they can acquire assets, and rarely in this economic era, where you can acquire assets for actually less than their replacement cost. Historically, that's been an excellent strategy, and I've heard from investors that say, listen, we can now buy retail centers at a 7 cap that 2 years ago would have had a sub-6 capitalization rate, and we think that we can make money buying them at a 7 cap.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think retail has a lot of opportunity, and we sell shopping centers around the Southeast, and when we put them on the market, even though some of the sellers feel like, hey, this is the time to move them, there are a lot of buyers that come out of the woodwork and compete for them. So I think one man's trash is another man's treasure, and there's opportunities there. And we were talking before the show, and one of those opportunities is to changing use on some of these retail properties, right?
Yeah, and that's change of use in two senses. One is a drill down into what the consumers do. It's true that 70% of GDP is personal consumption expenditures, but about 2/3 of personal consumption expenditures are in the realm of services rather than in the realm of goods. So within the shopping center, you see changing tendency from apparel and furniture and some of the other traditional goods sold not only in malls but in power centers and other outlets, to more service-oriented uses, medical services, food, entertainment, wellness concerns that are expanding at the very time that the retail chain stores that have been the mainstay of those centers are contracting and in closing modes. But then the second shift is that we have enough retail space in the country at 25 square feet per capita to say that that's a multiple of capacity in any other country in the world. We have just gotten so enthusiastic about retail that we built too much of it. And yet these centers are typically pretty well located. They've got good transportation access. They tend to be targeted to where there are decent incomes. They have buildings that have been built to a high standard because of the needs of the retail tenants. And so many of these buildings and these sites can be repurposed to other uses, and that's particularly important in an era where mixed-use development, where the live, work, play, 24-hour city environment that you and I have talked about in the past come into play. So I would suspect that we're going to see the redevelopment of a lot of B and C shopping center sites to more interesting and more complex uses.
Yeah, very good point. I think a lot of retail properties are real good real estate. You're right, they're real well located. So before I let you go, I wanted to get your idea on some of the opportunities there might be out there, whether it's a sector or certain development or acquisition strategy. But before we get there, what are some headwinds? What are some challenges that people may want to look out for?
Okay, so where are the risks in both the economy and in the industry? Yeah. If I've got your question,
yes, sir.
As you intended it. So certainly there are a bunch of them. We're using technology here. There is some question as to whether the application of technology is going to bring some risks into the real estate sector. A lot of that discussion has been couched in, will there be job disruption? Will there be job destruction from the application of technology? But I'm not that worried about that, to tell you the truth. I think that just as you and I are not computer people, but we use computers all of the time in our work, that will be true of the newer technologies, either prop tech or fintech, that is, say, property technology or financial technology in the real estate industry. We'll be using that to advantage. The threat that I see is, as we become more technologically interconnected, that cybersecurity becomes a really, really critical liability to the industry. And it's one that we're not totally on top of, as hacking, not only in the electoral realm, but also in the commercial realm and in utilities, has become more and more apparent as something that not only can be done by bad actors, but is being done by bad actors. And I think real estate will have some liabilities on that front.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think that is one of the scary challenges out there too. There's so much fraud and scams and just there's terrible things going on out there to all people across America. And in commercial real estate, we certainly have a lot of information in our systems. Well, where are some opportunities right now?
Yeah, so I think it's time for contrarians. It's time for people to look away from the safest of investments to begin to look to where there are niche opportunities that have long-standing viability. And so if technology is something I'm concerned about, it's also something that I think creates opportunities for us. So cities and property types that have strong technological applications, from Silicon Valley to Boston to the venture capital in New York City, that's enabled Google to again spend a couple of $1 billion to buy an existing building next door to its New York operation. So it now has 4 million square feet of space in the Chelsea area. I think those are opportunities because people want to do business with the technology companies, and they create a feeder network of smaller firms that support those industries. One of the elements of federal budget, and I think we've talked about this in the past, Michael, that is unevenly distributed, is that with much higher defense spending in place and provisioning, that those cities that have strong either defense contracting or in proximity to large military bases, or places, for instance, where multifamily assets can be well appreciated. Garden apartments, particularly, and I think lastly, even though suburban growth is again picking up and the bashing of the suburbs has seemed to run its course, I think that in a period in which you're going to see perhaps more selective investment on the part of cross-border investors and institutional investors, that cities that have the 24-hour live, work, play characteristic are going to be desirable. First, because they provide better liquidity in down cycles, but more importantly, because over the ups and downs of cycle, they produce superior risk-adjusted returns.
Yeah. Yep. Well, great opportunities, and I like your risk there, technology, but also one of the opportunities there. Hugh Kelly, great information as usual. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
And thank you for joining us. Now, stay with us. We're going to have more on this show on PhDs on CRE. Stay with us. I'm Michael Bull, and this is America's Commercial Real Estate Show.